President Muhammadu Buhari has written to the Senate seeking approval for external loan of $5.5 billion to enable the federal government finance the 2017 budget. Many had argued that this will add to Nigeria's debt profile. Let's talk to an economic analyst and the CEO of Cowrie Assets Management, Johnson Chukwu, who joins me now from Abuja. Good morning, Mr. Chukwu. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Now, how would you describe the timing of this loan that the president is seeking for?
Well, in terms of the timing, if you look at the fact that the budget year is just running to a close, we are already in October, and it takes at least a minimum of 2 weeks, or I believe in the neighborhood of 4 weeks, to assess the fund, depending on what source they want to get the money from. Maybe they want to issue Eurobond. So you are going to be looking at monies that will come into the coffers of the government in November. And that will just be barely a month to the end of the fiscal year. Yes, granted that the government can extend it to March next year. But that is not the greatest concern we have on the amount that's going on the borrowing the government wants to engage in. It is basically the volume that should be of concern to us. If you look at the 2017 budget, there was a budget provision that the government will borrow about 1 trillion internationally to fund the budget. The 1 trillion internationally, depending on the exchange rate you use, between $3 billion and $3.5 billion. Now we're talking about $5.5 billion, basically because there has been huge revenue shortfall. And that should be of concern to us, because after borrowing now, we should be in a position to also still be able to meet the payment obligation, interest service obligations.
Now, is this money he's asking for, is it small or much?
Well, it is higher than what was budgeted originally. Like I mentioned earlier, the budget provision is that we'll borrow about 1 trillion naira internationally, and that amounts to about $3 to $3.5 billion. The application that was made, the request that was made by the president is $5.5 billion. So what is driving the increase in the amount to be borrowed internationally? 2 factors. One, the government has said they want to refinance some of the local currency borrowing. 2, I'm aware there's huge revenue shortfall against the amount that was projected in the budget. So the government is also trying to close that gap in terms of revenue shortfall. And the challenge is that when you borrow at a time when your revenue is unstable and you continue to borrow, there's a risk that you may not be in a position to meet your interest payment obligation and repayment obligations. So those should be of concern to the government. But beyond that, we have to look at the pros and cons of the borrowing. What are the values the government wants to do? They had said that they want to refinance local currency debt, which means they want to unwind the crowding out of the private sector in assessing credit locally. But that's one side of it. But I think the summary of what we should be looking at is that how do we evolve an economic and financing structure that will minimize government continuing to borrow to fund critical infrastructure? Because if the government is not generating the revenue to meet those obligations, borrowing is not a sustainable way of funding infrastructure, particularly given that the infrastructure we are funding are mostly social infrastructure. They do not have direct and immediate economic, not that they don't have economic benefit, they don't have direct economic earnings as to be able to generate enough revenue to pay back those loans.
Now, let's look at the debt profile in relative to Nigeria's GDP. Is it really alarming, or are we still within the limit? Because right now, the total debt profile seems to be about $69.19 billion, right?
Yes, yeah, in dollar terms. But actually, foreign currency borrowing today is about $15.05 billion. If the government assesses the 5.5 billion, we'll be going to about 20 billion or 20.5 billion in terms of foreign currency borrowing. The greater concern will always be the foreign currency borrowing. You heard what the IMF said yesterday, that the volatility, if you look at the volatility of our foreign exchange earnings, which largely come from oil, that continuous accumulation of foreign currency debt could actually create some source of instability in the economy. And that's the reality of the matter. If you talk of the debt, Nigeria debt, and you're looking at GDP, you'll be making a fundamental mistake. The reason is this. and I always like to use this as classical example. If you have a 10-story building in Okokomaiko in Lagos, it does not have the same rental value as a 10-story building in Victoria Island. We have a GDP of about $500 billion. But in terms of government revenue, our revenue is very inconsequential or insignificant compared to our GDP size. So we should be benchmarking our debt service obligation as a percentage of revenue and not necessarily based on the GDP size. Because the GDP of Nigeria is not generating a kind of tax revenue that you ordinarily expect that GDP to generate, that GDP of that size to generate. Our tax revenue to GDP is less than 5%. Other countries, neighboring countries, in the neighborhood of 13%. So we have to look at it in that context.
All right. Now, you talked about the fact that borrowing is not the right way to finance infrastructure. Now, the topic on the lips of many now is the Economic Recovery Growth Plan of the federal government, which, of course, is being discussed at the Nigerian Economic Summit that is ongoing in Abuja. What does the ERGP recommend in terms of Nigeria's debt or borrowing?
Well, if you look at the GRP, Economic Growth and Recovery Plan, there's a fundamental philosophical direction that is contained in that document, which is that the government will move towards encouraging public-private partnership. Encouraging public-private partnership will reduce the level of amount that government will need to borrow to fund infrastructure. We have been toying with the idea of allowing the private sector to do a few projects, and then we always reverse trying to make those things to be funded from the budget. Unfortunately, the budget is not buoyant enough. The government revenue is not buoyant enough to fund a lot of the infrastructure we need to do. So if you look at the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, and I think that's a very attractive document in terms of philosophical or I call it a wish list document. But we need to look at how do we actualize some of those things. We cannot, as a country, continue to fund infrastructure from public expenditure. The government doesn't have that. I always like to emphasize this. If you look at the 2017 budget, total borrowing is about 2.35 trillion, whereas total capital expenditure is about 2.24 trillion, which means entire capital expenditure for this year is going to be funded from borrowing, meaning that the government does not have a headroom of 1 kobo from its revenue to fund infrastructure. So you cannot, if you look at the kind of infrastructure gap we have today, we cannot continue to borrow at the public sector level to fund our infrastructure. So we need a paradigm shift. We need to move away from the concept that the government must fund it and find ways the government can work with the private sector to fund some of this infrastructure. And I think that should be the course of our economic direction now.